Go.
Hi, and welcome to Writer Mother Monster. I'm your host, Lara Ehrlich, and our guest tonight is Rachel Zucker. Before I introduce Rachel, I want to thank you all for tuning in and let you know that you can now listen to Writer Mother Monster as a podcast on all major audio platforms or read the interview transcripts at your leisure, all on writermothermonster.com. If you enjoy the episode, please also consider becoming a patron or patroness on Patreon. And as always, chat with us during the interview. Your comments and questions will appear in our broadcast studio and we'll weave them into the conversation. Now I'm excited to introduce Rachel. Rachel Zucker is the author of 10 books, including most recently SoundMachine, a recipient of fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts, MacDowell Colony, and the Sustainable Arts Foundation. She is an adjunct professor at NYU and at the Antioch Low Residency MFA program. Founder and host of the podcast Commonplace, Conversations with Poets and Other People. She is working on an immersive audio project also called SoundMachine and a book of lectures called The Poetics of Wrongness. For more info, visit www.rachelzucker.net. Rachel is the mother of 3 boys, ages 21, 20, and 13, and she describes writer motherhood in 3 words as attachment, attachment, attachment. So now please join me in welcoming Rachel.
Hello.
Hello, thank you so much for coming on today.
It's great to be here.
Yeah, and I'm thrilled to have the chance to speak with you after reading all of your amazing work, but specifically your work on motherhood, which we'll get to. But first, you told me before the interview that you had worn a special necklace for Writer Mother Monster.
Yes. So it reverses so you can see it. This was a gift from my soon-to-be ex-husband for Mother's Day a few years ago. This is the first time that I'm wearing it publicly, but it's one of the strangest Mother's Day gifts that I could imagine, because in addition to wondering when I would ever wear this item, my then husband asked me to open it in front of the children. And so my youngest, Judah, I think was 10, 11 at the most. And then I had to explain what MILF was.
Oh, no.
So that was my Mother's Day. Yeah, but I felt like if there was ever a time to wear it, it was here.
Thank you for believing that, because absolutely this is the right place to wear it. I to have been a fly on the wall of that conversation, though. Yeah. So I mentioned you have 3 sons. That's ranging from 21 to 13, which those are very different stages of boyhood, I imagine.
Yep.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your sons and just what your house is like with this range of masculinity there.
Well, there's no one answer to that, of course, because each stage has been very different. I mean, there were 6.5 years when I had just 2 that were very close together, and that was, an experience in and of itself. And then having my third be 8 and 6.5 years younger than my 2 older boys was a whole other experience. That's sort of like raising an only child. Not entirely. His relationship with his brothers is very, very close. But in terms of the difference between having 2 children very close in age to having 1 with nobody close in age was really different. And then, of course, they started leaving. And so I had 0, then I had 1 for a very short time, then I had 2 for a long time, then I had 3, then I had 2, then I had 1, then I had 3 because of the pandemic. Everybody came home, and that's a very, very interesting kind of experience. I mean, mothers and mother writers are experiencing this pandemic in so many ways. And I think, obviously the having younger children and losing school as a thing that used to be dependable, or having to share space for work in ways that, most mothers hadn't had to do before, not to mention like employment disruptions, loss of jobs. I'm sure you've seen all of the statistics about the way in which the pandemic is specifically really undermining mothers, absolutely mothers of color to a much greater extent than white mothers, but mothers also as a group are losing so much in terms of job equality and jobs. So in any case, my experience of deciding to get divorced, but then quarantining with my husband and my 3 kids, 2 of whom were supposed to be in college, who were at ages where we didn't expect for them to be at home, was very intense, I will say.
I can imagine, yeah.
Yeah. And then right now, I have no children in the home. I have a puppy who's downstairs, who you might hear at some point. She is 10 months old. But I'm halfway through a 3-week period of time in which my oldest is back in college and my middle son and my youngest son are in New York City with their dad. And 3 weeks is a really, really long time for me to be away from both of them. And it's also, I 2 years ago, at exactly this period of time, I went to McDowell for the first time, for the only time in my life. And I was there for 28 days. And that was the longest period of time I'd been away from my kids. But I was in a community of other writers and artists. This period of time is the first period of time that I've been really, truly alone. And 3 weeks before this, I realized that it was my husband's first time being alone in his entire life for more than 2 days. So that's a whole other experience. And then, of course, alone is a different kind of alone right now. And I'm living in Maine, which is not where I've lived for my entire life. I've lived in New York City. And I'm living in kind of a seasonal community. And so there are very few people here right now. So the population density of Maine versus New York, but specifically of where I am, is pretty astonishing.
Wow. So I want to talk more about, obviously motherhood and writing, but tell me what it's been like the last couple weeks of aloneness in Maine versus New York City. Are you finding that you're able to work, or is it? I'm hearing from a lot of writers that this pandemic period is either very productive or not productive at all, and we have different expectations for ourselves and different feelings around what productivity even is. So what is it to you right now during this period?
Yeah, I was going to say productive in what way? And I think that's a big. I'm really working on that. I'm working on that in therapy. I'm working on that. I've been working on it for a very long time, but yeah, I haven't written anything since the pandemic started, and I wasn't writing hardly at all before that, and barely able to work on my podcast. Teaching was, I taught 2 classes in the fall, and I'm working with a group of students through Antioch now, but it's a very different working at all. Or what I have thought of as work, right, is no, I'm entirely unproductive.
Yeah.
On the other hand, I make dinner almost not in this time that I'm alone. I'll talk about that in a second, but before these 3 weeks, I was making, it was like I was running a restaurant, because we were all in Maine, and I take COVID and have since the very beginning very, very seriously, and we were really, really in lockdown, very, very isolated, able to be to do that. So, and it's heartbreaking in a certain way, and I feel sorry for myself, but on the other hand, I should get over it, like get over the feeling sorry for myself. I mean, I've been getting divorced this year, and going through mediation, making the decision, working it through with Josh, finding a mediator, going through mediation, talking to lawyers, figuring things out legally and financially, and then emotionally. I mean, I am still technically married, and so I've been married for 23 and a half years, and have had the same partner we were together for like 3 years before we got married. So that's my entire adult life. And, I mean, I'm trying to figure out how to date as a 49-year-old woman, during a pandemic, when I take COVID really seriously. And I am basically Rip Van Winkle. Like I woke up, and 25 years later, and I'm like, what is this Tinder? What is this? What is it? How do female humans do this? Like, really, so if you think about it that way, I am almost finished with mediation. Telling the kids, thinking about how to tell the kids, thinking about, I mean, the number of hours of therapy that I've been lucky to be able to have, and the time in between, talking to my friends, working on it. I mean, if you want to think about it that way, it's the most productive year, like maybe that I've had in a very long time. Very intensive parenting, very intensive self-reflection, and like it's kind of a birth in a sense, because I'm giving birth to like a new self, and on the one hand, I'm in this kind of old lady body, but I'm also like totally an adolescent. Because the last time I was not married or in a monogamous, very serious relationship, I was basically an adolescent. So it's kind of all over the place. I think I've read 3 full books since the pandemic. I've listened to more music than I have. I listen to a lot of New York City Public Radio. I listen to a lot of podcasts, but not as many as I used to, actually.
Oh. Are you missing the time? So I listened to a lot of podcasts too when I was commuting, and now I'm not commuting. So it's like, you have to be very selective about which podcasts you're going to fill that time with if you're taking a walk or something. But,
yeah, can I recommend one,
yes,
actually?
please.
I don't know if you've heard Appearances with Sharon Mashihi. Yeah, I mean, first of all, it's fantastic, and there's a lot of issues around being a mother, wanting to be a mother, being a maker, wanting to tell a story about motherhood. Really interesting, I think, in terms of single moms, or women that aren't sure. Anyway, it's a really compelling and well-made podcast that like does the thing I love, where it goes into like the meta, and it's made by Caitlin Prest, who has done a lot of work that I love. The Shadows, or maybe it's just Shadows, and The Heart. So I love those podcasts. I mean, they're really like art.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. A great
Yeah.
podcast is like our, and speaking of podcasts, you have your own podcast, speaking with poets. So tell me a little bit about that. And you said it's been a little hard to focus on putting them out, which it sounds like, I mean, you have so much going on. I can understand why that would be. But tell me a little bit about the podcast. Tell us who some of your guests have been and the topics that you've addressed. And if for anyone who is interested, the website for it is fantastic. I took a look there and you just have the most wonderful episodes. So everyone should check it out. But tell us some more about it.
Sure. I'm not being self-deprecating. Commonplace is fantastic. I don't know that it's art. It's not a highly produced show the way Appearances is. It's not. It's a long form conversation podcast. So the episodes are often between like an hour and a half and 2 hours. So we really go to like a deep dive, but it's similar. It's very similar to this, but no video. And I've had, I think, almost 90 people on. Mostly it's single artists, and mostly it's poets. I'm just going to mention a few of the writer mothers that
Yes,
I've had
please.
on, although it's not in any way limited to writer mothers. But just off the top of my head, Sharon Olds, Claudia Rankin, Sarah Vapp, McKenna Goodman was the most recent episode. So like McKenna and I were talking about her first novel, The Shame, which is about a character who is also a mother of young children, and her motherhood is very central to the plot of the novel. It's a great book. I highly recommend it. A short, riveting novel, The Shame by McKenna Goodman.
All right.
Write it down.
You heard it here. Yep.
Or I interviewed, I try not to use the word interview. I recorded a conversation with Darcy Steinke before the pandemic about her kind of like nonfiction memoir called, oh my God, how am I forgetting the title? It's about menopause and whales and sexuality, and it's totally awesome and amazing. And I'm going to remember the name in just a minute. But Darcy Steinke, Steinke, also a kind of short book, total page turner, totally compelling. One thing, you asked me, what do I want to make sure I talk about?
Yeah.
And I guess we don't have to actually talk about it, but it drives me nuts that it's so hard to have solidarity, amongst women, amongst mothers. And there are a lot of reasons for that. But one of them is that like motherhood is so intense at almost every stage. And you like, thank you,
There we
Flashbound
go.
Diary. Awesome.
Thanks, Minna.
It's hard to be interested in menopause when you're obsessed, understandably, with sleep training. It's hard to think about like, I wonder what it's like to try to have sex after a hysterectomy in your late 40s after a divorce, when you're just like, oh my God, my nipples hurt from breastfeeding. And I think that I don't think none of this is intentional. It's not the way the patriarchy separates and divides women. That's also happening, but it has a similar effect in the sense that like, so many women I speak to now say, oh, I never saw a woman nurse before I nursed. And, starting to go through menopause and then having a hysterectomy, and now, just sex post, pre, during divorce, all of these kinds of things are sort of the central things in my life, just as like, how to be a mother to adult children, how to be a mother to adult male children, how to sort of gather the strength to accompany my third male child through puberty. Knowing what I know, I almost wish I didn't. is what I'm so obsessed with. Like I'm just like I'm desperate for wisdom, experience, advice, from mothers who are half a generation older than I am, or even like my age, or 5 to 25 years older than me. But it's hard to have that conversation when we're at such different stages.
And generations, I would imagine, right? Like,
Yeah.
I can ask my mother for her advice, but her generation was so much different than mine, and
Hmm.
breastfeeding wasn't necessarily encouraged when she was breastfeeding me. And then when of course I had my daughter, it was breast is best, and there was such pressure there that she couldn't quite understand to be able to guide me or advise me. So yeah, just even the generational differences are there too. So yeah. Did you know that you wanted to be a mother from the time you were young, or was that something that snuck up on you?
I knew I wanted to be a mother. Like, that's one of the first things I knew about myself. And there's a conversation online that you can find somewhere between me and the writer Sarah Manguso.
Mhm.
This was back when Sarah did not have her son, and was pretty sure that she didn't want to have kids, and she really felt that she wanted to continue her life as a writer without the kind of hindrance and interruption of motherhood. And we had like a long online email conversation back and forth about this, and I was pretty upfront, and people were a little bit sort of shocked, like because I admitted at that time that I felt like I kind of didn't understand women on some level who didn't feel this like deep uh, biological, it felt biological to me, like desire, like that I knew. I didn't really know that much of anything else, but I knew I wanted to be a mother. And my youngest son actually talks about that all the time. That this is something that and since he was little, um, uh, but that's changed so much for me, like as things have gone on, and also like thinking about or investigating uh, where that desire came from. I mean, I think for a very long time, I think part of why I wanted to be a mother was that I wanted to do it differently than my mother had done it.
Mhm.
And I mean, you hear this all the time, and I couldn't have imagined feeling this way. Like, insert 800 things next. But the one I was going to share was, yeah, I feel like, so my mother died in 2013. Um, but now going through this divorce, oh man, do I want to talk to my mother, and do I understand my mother in a way that I did not before. I
Mhm.
really blamed my mother for my parents' divorce, which was very traumatic for me. Um, and I really thought that I mean, that was one of the sort of central damaging things, that my mother was a writer and an artist and chose her work over me, and was ambitious, and um, did the best she could, but it wasn't really good enough. And then she got divorced and ruined my life. Um, you know, I have a very different understanding of that right now. I have to, in some ways, and I also do, like coming to the point of recognizing that I was going to make this choice, which I didn't think was the choice that I was going to make.
The
Um,
divorce, you mean, as a choice?
yes, yes, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Tell me a little bit more about how the desire to be a different kind of mother than yours played out, particularly when your kids were young, and what you might have tried to do differently than she did when it came to your writing and how you prioritized your craft and your family.
I mean, I didn't want to be a writer. Um, I wanted to be a stay-at-home mom and like do art projects all the time. And I wanted to have I'm an only child. I really wanted to have like 4 children, and I only wanted to have sons. This was before I had sons, because I didn't want to, recreate the relationship of me and my mother. So Lord knows there's nothing the same if you just have sons. I mean, it's such crazy bullshit, because I'm still a mother, just like my mother was a mother. Yeah, I mean, gender, and also like gender has my understanding of gender and my experience of gender have changed so much since I was a little girl wanting to be a mom, different from my mom, that it's just like a joke, that I thought that would solve all the problems. So yeah, I had that idea that that's kind of, I didn't want to work. And I think I wanted some kind of, my mother was like really a feminist, and kept her maiden name. And I went to a very religious, I went to yeshiva from 1st grade to 8th grade, and my parents were the only divorced parents for the whole time that I was there in my grade. And my mother was one of the very few mothers who worked. And like the level of pity for me that was generated for the wrong reasons. So, like, I don't know, I had some idea that I was going to be like some kind of Betty Crocker or something, and that this was going to be like so sustaining to me. And I was going to be grateful every single second. And that I was going to love being pregnant. And I mean, I hated being pregnant. I was sick every second, and everything was disgusting. I mean, look, I'm a birth doula. I've been a childbirth educator. Like I do not find birth disgusting. I do not find pregnancy disgusting. It's beautiful. I'm just saying, when I first got pregnant, and every time I got pregnant, I was like, yeah, this is not what I thought it was going to be.
Oh my God, all 3 times. Oh.
Yeah, I was actually pregnant 4 times and had a miscarriage, which was also not, I was like, yeah, this is not what anybody described. None of this is what I thought anything was going to be like. Anyway, and then of course I really wanted to be a writer, and I also was a writer. And then I think I thought for a long time, yeah, but I'm not like my mom because I'm a poet. So that's totally different.
Yeah.
I mean, really, the stories we tell ourselves. But there were a lot of things, I do think that having 3 children was a very, very different experience than growing up as the only kid. And it's not just about being the only kid. I mean, in some ways that I now admire to some extent, but at that time, like, really was very unpleasant and lonely for me. My parents, neither of them were ever focused on like my childhood. They were focused on me, but I didn't have friends. We didn't have other families that we hung out with. Like, my parents did adult things with adults, and I was their kid. That does not describe my life in the past, 22 years. I went to the playground, for example, many thousands of times. My mother was, I can't understand that. I know. It's my fault, though.
No, I know.
I
Keep
should
going.
speak every language. Okay.
I'll see if I can translate it really quick.
I'm a really good cook, for example. My mother didn't really, she didn't really care that much about food. She was like, if you're hungry, you'll eat peanut butter and jelly.
Oh,
That's
no.
it. But I made the regrettable decision. It wasn't really a decision. It was just sort of happened. I'm a really good cook, and my kids love food. But it was like every night it was like a gourmet meal. Why did I do that? I mean, it's one thing to do it during a pandemic when you have, like, it's the only pleasure you have. But I mean, I really made a ridiculous number of foods for those young children with their discerning palates.
Yes.
Stuff like that, where I didn't travel the way my mother did. I did not have a nanny the way, I had a babysitter for my whole childhood. I didn't do that. I sent my kids to daycare, which was a very, very different experience. But even that, I even today, I've never been able to do what my mother did, which was to say, like, I'm working now. Go away. I'm working, or to just go away herself. I have struggled with that so pointlessly. I
Well,
wish
you
I
said you went to McDowell and that was the sort of the longest time you'd been away from your kids. Did you have to kind of force yourself to go? How did you finally carve that space for yourself, and were you conflicted about it?
I had traveled without my kids for shorter trips, almost from the beginning, and that was important. I think it was also really important to me because the emotional and physical labor of parenting was not shared equally between me and my husband, and in fact, it was really far from equal. He was a great dad and is a great dad, but he was not doing anywhere close to half. And so the only time that I was able to almost not be a mom or almost take a break is if I was just entirely not there. And my husband's a very capable person and would rise to the occasion when I would go away. When I was there, he couldn't maintain the level of competence that he had when I wasn't there. So it's not that I had never left them, and I do think that was like from the beginning I left them with him in a way that I know is hard for some women. I didn't have that problem, but it was more like going away for an extended period of time to write. It was one thing to teach, it was one thing to make money, it was one thing to like fulfill a family obligation, to go to a best friend's wedding or something, but to go to write was something that I couldn't imagine. And I actually want to say, you said in the beginning that that I was a McDowell Fellow and a Sustainable Arts Foundation Fellow. And I just wanted to say that I applied to McDowell many, many times. And I applied to lots of residencies many, many times and was rejected and rejected and rejected and rejected every single time. And I remember after I had my miscarriage in April of 2005, very soon after I found out, I was like 13 weeks pregnant, and I found out it was a blighted ovum pregnancy. So there was, no baby, just an empty gestational sac. I got a string of rejections from McDowell and from all the other writers' colonies that I'd applied to. And, I had waited until my older boys I felt old enough that I could go, and I knew I wanted to have a third kid. And so I felt like this was my only chance. And when those rejections came, I mean, it was all of the disappointment of losing the pregnancy and of, all these other things. But the rejections for the writers' colonies were just brutal. And when I was a kid, I went with my mom to a writer's colony called Cummington Colony for the Arts. And it was the only colony that allowed children to come. And then when I had kids, there was nothing like that anymore. They stopped letting children come, and so it really was like you either and many of the residencies you had to commit to 4 weeks, and so it really was prohibitive to almost every mother that I knew, and really I had a whole drama about, these residencies and these colonies. And the Sustainable Arts Foundation is specifically support for parents who have a child under the age, I believe, of 18 who's living at home. And so I really recommend people who are parents apply for that or look it up. It's a beautiful thing that it exists, and I'm really grateful for that. And I'm hoping that more of these colonies and residencies and fellowships can start to accommodate fathers and mothers, but particularly mothers. Who can't otherwise participate in these amazing opportunities. So, and I don't think people think very hard about the way that how exclusionary it is. Yeah. So MacDowell was a profound experience for me. It was the first time in my adult life that I didn't have to make dinner every night. That somebody fed me, and that was it was very emotional, actually, to be cared for in that way, and to that just had never been. I'd never had that experience, not from my mother, not from my father, certainly not from my husband. And I loved going to dinner every night and, being with other writers and talking. It was not easy. Both of my older sons were really struggling at that time. And I think that there were probably in 28 days, at least 10 times that I thought I was going to have to go home. And I really didn't want to go home. But I would have if I needed to.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, there's so much there. Thank you, first of all, for putting it out there that those types of residencies can be exclusionary. I found the same thing before I had a child. Even then, it felt exclusionary. But if you have a full-time job, it's hard to take a month
Yes.
off of your full-time job. But then, especially after having a small child, and my daughter's 4 now, as I mentioned, but I definitely, if I see that it's a more than like a maybe 10-day or 2-week requirement, I can't possibly. I mean, I probably could make it work, but I don't want to.
Yes.
I just don't feel that desire to be away for a month. 2 weeks is probably a good number, but that makes me think that on the Writer Mother Monster website, I'll have to start putting some residencies that are like the Sustainable Arts Foundation and others that do allow for shorter residencies. That's really important to writer moms.
And
Yeah.
there are also journals. I'm forgetting the full name of it. There's like a Canadian journal that's dedicated to research about mothering, and there's a bunch of, and I'm happy to also share those with you. And thank goodness, it's sort of more and more. And I think that thing that you just said is so vital too, right? Like I think that mothers are often made to feel guilty, like, well, you're choosing not to go away for 4 weeks. And I just heard you say I couldn't do it, and then I didn't want to.
Yes.
And I'm not saying that's not a choice. It is a choice. And it's also, I would support you, Laura, if you decided you did want to go away for 4 months, for 4 months, for 4 weeks. But also, it's not so simple as a choice, And I think that this whole word and concept of choice is very complicated for women in our generation. Because for many women now, motherhood is a choice. Not all, but for many women, it is a choice. And it's almost as if once you made that choice, everything else is your fault.
Yes.
You asked for it.
Yes.
And you got it.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. I even hear it from good friends of mine who are not mothers, who respect motherhood and respect me, but they will say to me, "Oh, an employee of mine decided to become a mother. but why should that then be my, they then have to deal with, for example, maternity leave, and it's like, well, it was her choice to have a child, she's choosing to take maternity leave and put her career on hold. And you're right, it's a lot more complex than that.
Yeah, and just even to tie it back to the residency thing, I mean, those residencies were basically created for men with tenure track jobs,
Yeah.
who were on an academic calendar. And so, like, I mean, as I said on Twitter, I've never had a tenure track job. Part of why was that when my kids were little, I didn't apply for tenure track jobs.
Yeah.
And in fact, I left teaching for a while because I was an adjunct, and I realized I was spending all of my time either being a mom or being a teacher. And really, I had become an adjunct because I wanted to write. And I was like, okay, I'm barely making any money teaching. I'm going to stop. I'm not going to stop being a mom, but I've stopped writing. So I'm going to stop teaching. And then I was a doula. I, was trying to think of all these different things. And, in part, when I got back into the job market, I had been gone for too long. I had too many books. I had been too successful. That's not the only reason I didn't get a job. There's a lot of reasons, and part of it is there are so many qualified, talented, amazing candidates, and the whole system of the way MFAs is like just pumping out these very talented writers, but you can't, the supply and demand is totally off. But it is absolutely true that I was less hireable than some other people for junior faculty positions, because by the time I was full on the job market, I had 6 books, I'd won awards, I was too old, nobody knew what to do with me. And so, to then not be on the academic calendar because you've been sort of kept out of academia because you chose to have children and do other kinds of part-time work, and then when you have to go, or full-time work that's not on the academic calendar, you can see these things piling up. And if you're also paying back student loans, or if you're trying to choose between how much money does it cost per hour to send your children to daycare or to get a babysitter versus how much money are you going to make per hour as a poet?
Yeah.
None. As a novelist, almost none. So if you're just doing the economics of the family, you're screwed. You're basically screwed.
Yeah, no matter what, as you say, you choose because it's not really a choice, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And, and it's complicated because, I mean, I feel very grateful to not have had the grief that my friends had over infertility, or, I did have childbirth and pregnancy losses, but not to the extent that, my friends did. And, to want to be a parent and not be able to be a parent, and then to have people who are talking about their children like, oh my God, I'm so tired. It's so boring. It's killing my soul. I can't make enough money. It is painful. But again, these are the things that divide women, that divide working people, that divide artists, that divide, parents from each other, instead of saying like, oh, how do we make a society where people can make creative work, because we care about that, and how do we support that, and how do we make a society where people can have children? Like, people are going to keep having children, and
Right.
and it's not just a choice. Yes, it's a choice. You can make a choice not to have children too, and that's also wonderful. But most people are going to have children, and if everyone stopped having children, we would actually eventually have some problems, or problems of a different nature. So I don't know. I just think we get into a whole lot of trouble with this choice thing, and then layer on top of that the real tendency for women to be apologetic and accommodating, and mothers on top of that to be, you know, I can say with honesty, it is some dreary work sometimes. But I'm not going to say, because it's not true, but also because there's pressure not to say it, that I've never myself, I have never regretted, having children. But there are many times where I'm like, holy shit, like it didn't have to be this hard. What the fuck? Like, am I supposed to not curse?
Oh no, please
Okay.
go ahead.
Okay, thank
You
God.
can
Yeah.
curse, and I have my whiskey glass right here. It's fine.
I mean, I have no children here. It's been like 10 days. That's easy. I mean, I'm lonely, but like, come on. It is much easier.
Yeah. Oh yeah. The other day I was thinking that this is a tangent, but I was trying to do a meeting for work, a Zoom meeting, and my daughter was sitting next to me at the desk drawing, and then suddenly she flipped to a coloring book page that I had done, and she was so angry. She threw a fit. She was on the floor. She was like trying to pee on the floor and couldn't manage it, but she was so mad. And I had to say to work people, I was like, I'm sorry, I have to turn my video and audio up and deal with this, but oh, so much easier on days where she's not there to just have an adult conversation. Or
Did you tell your coworkers what sin you had committed?
I did. I did. I try to be very open with my coworkers because I'm in a senior level leadership position, and I feel like it's important for people to recognize that there are mothers who work, and it's a pandemic, and sometimes the kids are sitting next to you, and just to have realistic expectations about what that looks like. So yes, I try to always say it's because I colored her coloring page, or like whatever the thing is. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think it's important too. I've been trying to do a better and better job at this, to tell my kids how much I love to work. And I think my kids do know that, and to not feel like horribly guilty about that, because that's also a weird thing that I used to do when they were little, sort of like, oh, I have to just, as if like it was not what I wanted. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I find myself wanting to say that to my daughter too. And I'll tell her sometimes, I would so much rather be playing with you than in this meeting. And that's true some of the time. But other times, no, I really enjoy what I do. And I would actually rather be doing this, whatever it is I'm doing at work.
Yeah.
And it's probably maybe not for a 4-year-old to tell her that, but when she's older, I might start telling her that. Sometimes this is important.
I think that's part of why I became such a good cook. I mean, I've always liked it, but I think also, like, if I'm going to be honest, I didn't love to play with my kids.
I don't either.
And I thought I was going to be like make like dress up and imaginative play, and I mean, I have a really close friend who, when she also has 3 sons, and I can't remember exactly what she said, but basically, this was, I was always sort of confessing, like, I mean, it's so boring. I mean, whatever it was at the time, like he wants to play Bakugan, or like, I just don't really like Legos, that much with the Legos already,
And they want to play it for hours and hours.
Right. Or Candyland is the person who made Candyland should be killed. And Chutes and Ladders. I mean, I will never play Chutes and Ladders. I look forward to having grandchildren. I will never play Chutes and Ladders again. That is not even a game that should exist. Anyway, I was constantly saying, like, it's just, I mean, I feel so guilty. I mean, I know they're my children. I love them. And she would say, but you're an adult. Why would you want? You don't have the same interests as a child because you're not a child. And I know, there were many things that I loved to do with my children. And I know that there are people who like really, like my mom was very good at playing with my kids. Never played with me, but she was good at playing. But I guess I feel like, why do we have all this shame about it? Like, they're not that interesting. They're
No.
children.
No, I'm totally there with you, and I feel a lot of guilt about it, particularly now in the pandemic, because my daughter's not in preschool. So
Mm-hmm.
she spends a lot of time with my parents who are good about playing with her and with me and my husband, and I am with you. I'm just like, "Oh god, do we have to do blocks or do we have to, like, do this puzzle for the 50th time or whatever?" Like, I would so much rather take her somewhere or, go do something, but now we
Yep.
can't go do anything, so it's like this constant, like, play like, pressure to play, and I'm just like, "I don't like it. I don't like playing." I don't think I've ever really loved playing. I'm just not a very fun person, I guess. I don't know, but,
You
um
know what? And there could be so many delicious reasons for that. Like,
yeah,
maybe you're using your imagination for other things. And so
exactly.
you're a little short on imagination for, playing. I don't know. I
Mhm.
guess I just feel like there's so, this whole like helicopter mom thing. And, now we're screwed because we were too attentive.
Mhm.
It's like never ending with the fault and the fault and the shame and the
Oh,
guilt
yeah.
and all that stuff. But, and I don't want to go back to the 50s, and I don't want to go back to the 60s, and I don't even really want to go back to the 70s. I definitely don't want to go back to the 80s. Ugh,
No.
80s were very bad. But I think we haven't yet found a way to be truly good enough mothers, attend to our children's basic needs, which include emotional needs,
Mhm.
psychological needs, the need to feel loved, the need for attachment, the need for routine and dependency. Like I'm counting. I think I have a high bar for basic needs, but not the need to get into a good college or any college, not the need to like have your favorite dinner every night, and if you don't get it, something else. Not, I made that mistake. Ugh.
Ugh.
Not the need to have play dates. No, when you're old enough to go there on your own, you can have a play date. I don't know. I play dates. Even the word, or like I one time I took an Italian class briefly, and the woman was ranting and raving. She was a mom living in the United States, and she was ranting and raving about the word snack. And she said, "There's no word in Italian for snack." I don't know if this is true or not, but she said, "This preoccupation that you have in the United States as mothers with snacks. Why do children need snacks? Stop feeding your children snacks. Just feed them food." And I know what she meant. It was like, now children need their own language, their own way of being treated, their own. We can't call it food; it's snacks. That they have to eat at all times of day and night. Um,
Mhm.
but then they also need all the limitations, and they need to be safe, and the world is so horribly dangerous. But if we keep them too safe, then they're not going to be resilient. And, they need, I mean, it's impossible. So,
Yeah.
we all need to work. We all need to parent. We can't, obviously, we're not going to try to, put our children in we do everything we can to make sure that whoever is taking care of them when we're working is loving them and caring for them and meeting their basic needs, and the economics of that are impossible.
Yeah.
You know there's no ethical solution to the, especially not now that there's no school. I mean, we're all just screwed.
Oh, yeah.
I have nothing positive to say.
No, I know, there's no way to win. There's just no way. There's no way to be like a good mom with, like, a capital M right
Yeah,
now.
yeah,
No, and I think it's so important to hear that and to say that to each other also and say, like, "It's okay." If you don't wanna make 3 dinners and maybe should we be making 3 dinners? That's the other question. I know, and my daughter, she won't eat her dinner and then say, "I'm hungry," and then we have to we're working on saying, like, "Well, then you don't get anything more to eat tonight,"
yeah.
because then you have, like, a 4-year-old who's hungry and anyway. So, yes, I hear you on that.
Yeah.
I hear you on that. I do want to talk, since we're nearing the hour
Oh
mark,
yeah.
and we can keep talking all night, but I want to talk a little bit about your writing and your work, which of course I've read, and anyone who hasn't, please do. The most recent book I read was SoundMachine, which I just feel like I underlined the entire the entire like every line of that book just sort of hit me in the soul. But tell me about maybe the first poem, or would you call them so is it a book of poetry, a book of prose, somewhere in between? And tell me about the first one in the book, because that one was the one that I was most sort of
Yeah.
struck by.
I don't know if it's a book of poetry. I don't know if it's a book of prose. Um, it mostly doesn't look like poetry, but it's selling like poetry. So maybe it's poetry. I mean, I say that sort of with some snarkiness, but yeah, I mean, I think there is a way in which I don't think there was a form, there was a received form that fit into the binary of prose, poetry, not to mention memoir, short story, creative nonfiction, essay, lyric essay, um, uh, audio transcription. There was no one of those that I think was adequate to describing the experiences that I was trying to describe, which are primarily stories of motherhood, and in particular, how do you record, or how do you describe and communicate experiences that are um, internal, external, in the body, in the subconscious, the way in which you have like the running tape in your mind all the time. You're writing. The things you say to your kids, the things your kids say to you, maybe the things they're writing, the people around you, your own history with your parents and your children, the like history and world events as they're colliding, with your domestic, the public, the private. Like, how do you do that? Like the novel wasn't really invented for that material.
Mhm.
It's motherhood is, as famously Tilly Olsen said, you're so terribly interruptible. So what kind of narrative structure or lyric structure can contain or embody what it means to be interruptible, but also have a relationship with the reader in which you don't seem psychotic, frankly.
Right.
Because it's not a psychotic experience, and I mean, like there is form. Um, Maybe I shouldn't use the word psychotic. Interruptible and
Yeah, no, I
chaotic.
see what you mean.
Yeah,
Yeah. There's a
yeah,
narrative that makes
yeah,
sense. It's
yeah.
just sort of fragmented,
Right.
right?
Right.
It's
And
interrupted.
and the reason I shouldn't use the word psychotic is because it implies that that's pathological, which first of all there probably is a form that is experienced in psychosis that's probably fascinating, but also it's just I'm just saying that like the normative, the beginning, middle, and end with a central narrator, it wasn't going to do it. So okay, there's
Mhm.
the formal question. So Sound Machine is a book that who knows whether it's poetry or prose or lyric essay, but it included work of mine from a long time ago, and then very, very, not since the pandemic, but recent to that book. So it ends with a long poem that actually takes place not at MacDowell, but at a second writers' colony that I went to, which I won't tell you which one because I'm very nasty about the
Oh,
experience.
no. Yeah.
In that it's called Residency, uh, just wasn't a good experience. McDowell was an incredible experience for me, even though it was complicated. And, you know, like, I didn't really miss my husband, and that was
That tells
some
you
important
something.
information.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But the first poem is called Song of the Dark Room, and it's a long piece that I wrote when my middle son was probably about 6. So he's 20. No. He Judah was born, so he is probably 8. So 12 years ago. And it was never published. I didn't like know what it was, and it was about sort of a particular winter where we were reading The Long Winter by Laura Ingalls Wilder. I went through a period of time where I read all the girl books to my sons, which was fantastic. But also, it was a time when my middle son Abram was having a very hard time falling asleep, and so it was like sleep training all over again. And you know, it's very sort of controversial and difficult to figure out how to help your child sleep, how to help your baby sleep. But it's even you know, when all of a sudden a child at age 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I mean, my kids still have trouble with sleep, lots of different kinds of trouble with sleep. And I have trouble with sleep. So it didn't really get easier. And so there were all of these sort of ruminations about, you know, what it meant to sit in the room with him and write. And that's what I was trying to do. I was trying to like use that time to write because he wanted me to sit there with him. And then, you know, the therapist was saying, like, you can't sit there anymore. You know, he's you know, he's depending on you too much. And so what does that mean? And where is the mother writer self, and where is the mother self, and where is the writer self? And what does this have to do with, you know, discipline and practice and attachment and separation and, you know, giving your kid resiliency, you know, and autonomy, but also, you know, not abandoning them. You know, I still lie down with my 13-year-old. So I came to feel that this like admonition, you know, that children should learn to go to sleep. Again, I judge no one other than like, you know, real abuse and neglect of any kind. Like the other stuff, it's like I have no idea. I have no idea how anyone should be a parent. I have no idea how I should be a parent. I just know my own journey, and like, you know, and I know that like I just didn't do it the same, you know, with my youngest. And my friends still are like, why you still lie down with him? That's weird. You know what? Because it works and it's a really nice time. And I wish I just kept lying down, you know, with anybody who wanted me to lie down. You know, that's the thing. It's like you realize later, like, oh, you know, your 21-year-old is probably not going to ask you to lie down.
Yeah.
So anyway, yes, and so the piece kind of continues through all of these arguments between the husband and the wife about how to make the kid fall asleep, and snoring, and how to keep him quiet, and how to be quiet, and you know, all of these things.
Yeah, no, there's so much. I mean, first of all, I have to say it's reassuring to hear you talk about lying down with your 13-year-old. Our 4-year-old, about halfway through the pandemic, decided that she couldn't sleep alone and that she was lonely. And who were we to say that a 4-year-old who doesn't have friends right now has to sleep alone in her room down the hall? So she has been sleeping with us for probably like 3 or 4 months. And we have a lot of those same conversations about like none of us are really sleeping well, and what are the limitations, and my parents think it's weird, but we're like, well, you didn't live through a pandemic with us,
Yeah.
so like what do you have to say about it? So yeah, just all of those questions that it raises when your child needs you, I guess, and you're hearing different opinions from different places. So I really appreciated that part of what you were saying. And I also just I think that particular poem just encapsulates this conversation so well. It taps
Mhm.
into all of the things that we've been talking about being present, but having other things that you want to attend to and feeling guilty about that. And there was this line you say, even when I'm in the room, I'm leaving. Can he feel this? Is that why he grabs my wrist? And that sense of like, even while I'm playing, I'm sort of like edging away from the blocks. And it's like, so yeah, I don't know. That particular piece just really hit me hard and I loved it. So hearing you talk about it is wonderful.
Thank you. I remember hearing you say that thing about your daughter because I listened to the Katie Peterson episode, and I actually called my son, my oldest son Moses, after that, and we were talking for some reason we were talking about parenting, and I was like, oh, did I really screw you up? I was asking him about something in particular, like a sleep expert who a very sweet, lovely sleep expert. He dropped his nap when he was 2, and she said, go in the room and sit with him and tell him not to move. Like every time he moves, just say very gently, keep your body still, keep your body still, no moving. This is sleep time. And I was like thinking about that. I was like, what the fuck did I what? That is the creepiest thing I did. I thought it was a good thing to do. Anyway, I was like, oh God, did I just totally screw you up? And I said to him, I was like, people are so fucked up in their like idea about like you have to sleep with your child. You can't sleep with your
Right.
child. It's incest. It's going to lead to, they're never going to individuate. And, God, oh, for God's sake, it is just like everybody's just trying to get some sleep and not feel abandoned. And
Exactly.
why would you take a baby and, put the baby in the other room? Like, unless you need to.
Right.
And if you need to, oh my God, do it. And
Right.
if you don't, and if what makes you feel better and what makes your kids stop crying is sleep with them, or you're like, yeah, I mean, the fact that your daughter has nobody to play with, like that is real. That is
Right.
huge. That's not caused by you, but like this social isolation, if a parent was doing it, we would call it child abuse.
Oh
So
yeah.
we're keeping our kids safe, but like to me, it makes perfect sense that she would want to sleep in your bed. But it also makes perfect sense if you get to a point where you're like, yeah, but I'm also in the middle of a pandemic and I need to not have your body on my body right now. Like whatever it
Exactly.
is.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's that push and pull, right? And I yeah, this is just a hyper example, I think, of parenthood, right? I
Yeah,
mean, these are always the issues we deal with, but just put under a microscope where it's like, oh, yeah,
totally.
the stakes are just so much higher. But like you said, we're just surviving and you do what you have to do.
I mean, I hope we can come out of this with real like personal and more importantly institutional change. Like we can never, there are things that we should never go back to. There's no reason for in-person parent teacher conferences. Just be done with that. There's a lot of things that are opening up in ways that are, going to give, hopefully that will give people more accessibility and, more opportunity and more potential for an equal playing field. The problem is that, the pandemic so far has just made, every vulnerable group more vulnerable.
Mhm.
And the few people who were basically immune to everything that could possibly go wrong in a person's life have made billions of dollars.
Mm.
So I don't know. And you know, it's really hard to protest right now safely. So that constellation of things is very concerning to me. How do we continue to like dismantle capitalism, for example, and racism and white supremacy, and things that exclude women and exclude mothers? How do we do that? Well, I think that a major societal disruption, which is what's happened, is one of the things that we needed to make this happen. But then how do we like not slide back is really
Mhm.
really the question.
Absolutely. Yeah, and when it's over, what's left, right? Do we go back to the way we do we stay in the slide, or do we learn from what we've experienced this last year plus and move forward? It'll be interesting to see.
Well, I would say the last thing I'll say about this is that I, I would say it's not primarily the job of mothers and parents with young children. It is primarily the job of people like me. And so I don't know yet how to participate in that fight, in to not slide back, to move forward. But it really has to be the work of women who don't right now have young children at home, who are not, struggling just to, make enough money, or keep their jobs. And so I don't know yet how to do that work most successfully and powerfully. But I think, this is a call to like women my age and older, like you're really needed now, particularly white women, or women with privilege and power of any kind. Like now is the moment. Do not let us go back to the worst part of what was before.
That is absolutely perfectly said, and thank you for saying it.
Mm-hmm.
And a perfect place to end too, I think, with this call to action. Right. So thank you so much, Rachel, for coming on, for just your thoughtful and honest conversation. It's been such a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you all again for joining us tonight. As always, you can watch the video again, listen to the episode as a podcast, or read the transcript on the website writermothermonster.com. There you can also buy Rachel's books if you visit the bookshop link. Just there on the website, you'll find the books by all of our other authors for sale as well. And please also consider becoming a patron or patroness on Patreon to help keep the podcast going. So thank you all again. We'll see you next week. Rachel, stick around for a second so I can say goodbye, and
Great.
have a good night, everyone.
Stay safe.